The day my barn remodel got shut down by the HOA was the exact moment I knew I was done playing nice. I had the permits. I had the contractor. I even had the lumber stacked and ready to go. But then she showed up, Rowena Gallagher, the HOA president, in her usual pastel cardigan and oversized sunglasses, strutting onto my property like she owned it. "You can't build that barn, Gregory," she said, arms crossed like a middle school hall monitor. "It doesn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood." I stared at her, dumbfounded. My property was 3 acres on the edge of the community, surrounded by trees, with zero visibility from the main road. The only thing nearby was a retention pond and the half-built community clubhouse the HOA had been funneling dues into for the last year. "Rowena, I submitted my plans 2 months ago. You signed off on them." She pulled out a clipboard, flipping a page with theatrical flair. "I retracted the approval. The board reconsidered. Your barn is now non-compliant. Sorry, rules are rules." She wasn't sorry. She was grinning behind those sunglasses. It wasn't about the barn, it was about control. I'd kept my head down for 2 years since moving in. Paid my dues. Attended meetings. Nodded politely while Rowena and her little HOA crew, mostly retired busybodies with nothing better to do, came up with new bylaws every month. But now they were in my way, and worse, they were smug about it. "I'll appeal it," I said. "Be my guest," she chirped, spinning on her heel. "But I wouldn't waste your time. The board always sides with me." That night, I pulled out every document I had: permits, emails, blueprints, screenshots. I wasn't just mad, I was motivated. I found a clause in the HOA charter that gave exceptions for agricultural utility structures if they were for livestock or emergency storage use. My barn qualified, but it didn't matter. Rowena had already stacked the board with her friends. 3 weeks later, they held a special vote without notifying me and officially denied my remodel. The contractor canceled. The lumber sat untouched. My wife, Dana, told me to let it go. "It's just a barn, Greg." "It's not just a barn," I said. "It's about them thinking they can do whatever they want." That's when I got the idea. Rowena and her crew had been bragging for months about their new HOA clubhouse. They were converting the old community pool house into a luxury meeting hall complete with chandeliers, a commercial kitchen, and even a fireplace. But during one of the HOA meetings, I'd overheard something. Interesting, they didn't have all the permits yet. I did some digging downtown. Pulled records. Talked to a guy I knew in the building department. Turns out the HOA had skipped a few inspections. Electrical work hadn't been cleared. Foundation plans didn't match the build. And best of all, the clubhouse was technically on community land, which meant every HOA member had a right to request use of the space, including me, so I filed a request. "Use of clubhouse for personal construction workshop," I wrote. "Duration, indefinite. Purpose, community model barn showcase and storage." 2 days later, Rowena showed up at my door, red in the face. "You're not turning our new clubhouse into a storage shed." "Nope," I said. "Just a construction zone, already approved by the city." She blinked. "That's not allowed." "It is now." "Check the bylaws. I submitted the request, and since you didn't deny it within 72 hours, it's automatically approved." She tried to argue, but I handed her a copy of the regulation. Her hand trembled when she took it. For the next week, I moved in my tools: sawhorses, drywall. A stack of 2x4s. Every morning, I'd show up at the clubhouse in my overalls, turn on my power saw, and let the noise echo through the luxury space Rowena had spent months hyping up. She tried calling the city. They told her everything was above board. She tried changing the locks. I had the code. She tried yelling at me in front of a group of residents. "You're ruining the community space," she screamed. I just smiled. "I'm contributing to it. It's a model project. Maybe I'll hold a class next week." Proper framing techniques 101. I hear it's a hit with retirees. The new chandelier was still in its box when I rolled in a portable compressor and started drilling into a sheet of plywood right in the middle of the hardwood floor. The echo bounced off the unfinished walls of the clubhouse like a gunshot. A few of Rowena's cronies hovered by the door, watching with a mix of confusion and horror as sawdust began to pile on the floor they'd voted to stain Tuscan walnut. By Thursday, I had a table saw humming at full speed and a belt sander throwing up little clouds of wood particles. It wasn't just about making noise or taking up space, it was about reminding them this wasn't their private clubhouse. It belonged to all of us. And I had just as much right to be there as they did. On Friday morning, a thin man in a blazer and a clipboard showed up while I was cutting joints. "Gregory Langston," he asked, stepping over a pile of stacked pine boards. "That's me," I said, flipping my face shield up. "I'm with the insurance carrier for the HOA," he said, glancing around nervously. "We've received several complaints from the board about liability concerns with your activities here." "Then they should have thought of that before approving my usage request," I said, handing him a laminated copy of the signed approval. Page 3, Section 8. Liability is waived under personal use clauses as long as the space is not rented to the public and proper PPE is used on site. He scanned it, lips tightening. "I'll need to verify this." "Take your time," I said, turning the saw back on. He flinched at the noise and backed out the door. That weekend, I hosted my first workshop. I laid out folding chairs, passed out flyers, and invited a few of the more curious neighbors' folks who'd been quietly irritated with the HOA but never had a reason to speak up. We spent 3 hours going over framing techniques, load calculations, and the basics of structural reinforcement. "Rowena's gonna have a stroke when she finds out you're holding classes," said a man named Vince, a retired welder who lived down the hill from me. "She's welcome to attend," I said, handing him a level. "Bring cookies." By the following week, Rowena had called an emergency meeting. They tried to lock me out by changing the passcode to the clubhouse door. I found out when I arrived Monday morning and my code didn't work. I didn't yell. I didn't call anyone. I just pulled out the laminated copy of the usage approval, stapled it to the front door, and waited. By noon, the city inspector showed up. "Mr. Langston," he asked, as I sat on the tailgate of my truck sipping coffee. "Right here. Someone filed a report that you were trespassing." "Not trespassing," I said, handing him a copy of the approval and the original permit for the barn that started all this. "Just using a community space. Everything's permitted. Want a tour?" He did. I showed him the safety signage, the fire extinguisher I'd brought in, the spill-proof containers for all materials. He nodded as he checked boxes on his tablet. "You're actually more compliant than most commercial sites I inspect," he said. "Appreciate it." He turned to leave, then paused. "You might want to look into who filed the complaint, though. False reports to the city can carry penalties." That night, I pulled property records, meeting minutes, and financial disclosures from the HOA's filings. I wasn't looking for trouble, I was looking for patterns, and I found them. Over the past year, the HOA had reallocated over $70,000 in discretionary funds to cover costs for the clubhouse remodel. But the meeting where the reallocation was supposedly approved, it never happened. The minutes were copy-pasted from an older meeting, and the signatures were digitally inserted badly. I cross-referenced the timestamps with public notarization records. The dates didn't match. Someone had forged the approval. I printed everything. Then I called a friend from college, Maya, now a white-collar crimes investigator with the county DA's office. I emailed her the files. "Greg," she said after reviewing them, "this isn't just shady bookkeeping. This is actual fraud." "What's next?" "Let me make a few calls. Don't do anything yet. And don't confront them directly." I didn't. I waited. The next HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse, just like always. I arrived early and took my usual seat near the back. Rowena walked in with a packet of papers and an air of forced calm, but her eyes locked on me instantly. She didn't say a word. The meeting began with the usual fluff: flower bed budgets, parking complaints, a motion to ban certain exterior paint colors. Then she got to the new business. "We've received a number of concerns about unauthorized use of the clubhouse," she announced. "Effective immediately, we're revoking all personal use clauses." "No, you're not," said a voice from the doorway. Maya stepped in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She held a folder in one hand and a badge in the other. "Rowena Gallagher," she asked, stepping forward. "We need to speak with you regarding financial discrepancies involving HOA funds and falsified documentation." Gasps rippled through the room. Rowena's hands twitched, trying to gather her papers. "This is a misunderstanding," she began. Maya cut her off. "You're not under arrest yet, but you are being asked to come in for questioning. Cooperating now will look a lot better than resisting." One of the officers stepped forward and gently guided Rowena toward the exit. She didn't fight. She just looked around the room, stunned, as if the floor had vanished beneath her. The rest of the board sat frozen. One of them, a man named Curtis, opened his mouth, then closed it again without a word. After they left, Maya turned to me. "You've got guts, Greg. Most people just roll over." I figured if I was gonna raise a barn, I might as well raise some hell first. Word spread fast. Within days, residents were demanding access to the HOA's full financial records. A special election was scheduled. The clubhouse was temporarily closed this time for a full audit mandated by the county. And me, I went home, pulled the tarp off my lumber, and called my contractor back. "Time to build that barn," I said. "Permits still good?" he asked. "Better than good," I said. "They're bulletproof now." 3 weeks after Rowena's forced exit, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, the same gravel driveways, trimmed hedges, and mailboxes lined the streets, but there was a tension that had unraveled. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years now lingered at the ends of driveways, comparing stories. Some of them had been fined for mailbox posts being the wrong height. Others had paid mandatory landscaping fees that no one could trace. I didn't have to say much. Once the dam cracked, the current took over. On a cold Tuesday morning, I got a knock at the door just as I was wrapping up a rough sketch of the barn's loft layout. When I opened it, a woman in a deep green coat and leather gloves stood on the porch, holding a clipboard tucked under her arm. "I'm looking for Gregory Langston," she said, glancing at the nameplate beside the door. "You found him." "Detective Naomi Heller," she said, flipping open a wallet badge. "Financial Crimes Division, County Sheriff's Office." "May I come in?" I stepped aside, and she walked in with the kind of quiet precision that told me she wasn't here to ask rhetorical questions. Dana appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "She with the county?" Dana asked. I nodded. "Coffee?" Dana offered. "No, thank you." "I won't be long," said Heller, turning to me. "I'm following up on a separate thread from what your friend Miss Shapiro uncovered." "Maya," I said. "She mentioned something new." "She did, but this is bigger. We've been reviewing the HOA's financial history, and there's a series of wire transfers from the HOA's operating account to a private consulting firm. Problem is, that firm doesn't exist. No employees, no tax ID, just a fake storefront address and a disconnected number." I folded my arms. "What do you want from me?" "Records. Anything you might have collected: emails, transaction logs, receipts. We believe your HOA president and at least 2 board members created a shell company to siphon funds." Dana leaned against the wall. "For how long?" "Looks like it started about 14 months ago," Heller said, "but we're still untangling the mess." I went to the office and pulled out the bin I'd been building since the day Rowena tried to shut down my remodel. I handed Heller a labeled file with everything I'd found that hadn't already gone to Maya. She flipped through it silently, her expression unreadable. Then she closed the folder and met my eyes. "They're going to face charges," she said, "but this might extend beyond fraud. If we can prove they falsified documents to get access to restricted funds, we're looking at embezzlement, wire fraud, and possibly conspiracy charges." It wasn't satisfying, not yet, but it was something. 2 days later, Curtis, one of the former board members, was placed under investigative hold. He'd tried to move out of state, but the sheriff's office flagged his change of address form. The others were still under scrutiny, but no one had seen or heard from Rowena since she left the clubhouse meeting flanked by officers. Her house sat dark, blinds closed, car gone. I didn't dwell on it. I had a barn to build. The contractor returned with his crew, and this time, no one stood in our way. The foundation was poured in a day, framing went up in 3, and by the end of the month, the structure stood tall against the tree line. I'd added a second loft bay for storage and a small mechanical room for emergencies. The crew worked efficiently, but not without the occasional interruption. Neighbors stopped by with drinks, questions, or just to chat. A woman named Evelyn brought over a basket of preserves, and mentioned that her husband had once been threatened with a lien for putting up a holiday light display one day, too early. A man named Harris admitted he'd been on the board briefly, but left after Rowena suggested using HOA funds to install a decorative fountain in front of her home. "You didn't tell anyone?" I asked. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," he said, shaking his head. "She had everyone convinced she'd read the bylaws cover to cover. No one dared challenge her." "Better late than never," I said, handing him a pair of gloves. "Help me hang this beam." In early spring, the city held a public hearing regarding HOA oversight. Apparently, my situation had struck a nerve. Other neighborhoods had submitted complaints. The mayor even made a statement about increasing transparency in community governance. I gave a brief testimony, nothing dramatic, just facts. How the HOA had blocked legal construction, misused funds, and fabricated approvals. I left out the part about the power tools in the clubhouse. No need to dance on graves. 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a letter from the county court. Rowena had been indicted on 3 felony counts: embezzlement, falsification of municipal documents, and obstruction of an audit. Curtis and another board member, Lyle Dempsey, faced similar charges. All 3 had court dates scheduled for the following month. The new interim HOA board, hastily elected from a pool of volunteers, reached out to me. A woman named Teresa Graham, former librarian, now acting president, asked to meet at the clubhouse. When I arrived, she was already there, standing near the kitchen island with a man I didn't recognize. The chandeliers were finally installed, though one of them still had a tag dangling from a crystal. "Gregory," she said, extending a hand. "This is Anthony Rivas, our new treasurer." Anthony offered a firm handshake. "You've made quite the impression." "I try not to," I said. Teresa gestured toward a folder on the counter. "We're going through every expense." We found invoices for plumbing that was never completed, landscaping work that was charged twice, and a consultation fee for a man who doesn't exist. Sounds familiar. She opened the folder. "We'd like to publish a full report to the community, transparency going forward. But we also wanted to ask if you'd consider joining the board." I blinked. "You're kidding." "You don't have to be president," Anthony said. "Just help us keep the books clean." I looked around the room. The space was still rough. Half-painted walls, mismatched chairs, a broken thermostat. "But it had potential." "I'll think about it," I said. "But only if you promise never to ban barns again." They both laughed. Outside, the first blossoms had started to creep over the hedges. The barn, now fully enclosed, stood tall behind my house. I'd added a motion-activated light and a keypad entry, nothing too fancy, just enough to keep raccoons and nosy neighbors out. I was already planning to insulate the loft and use it as a hobby space. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering. Just neighbors, pizza, and folding chairs in the barn. We talked about gardens, dogs, and the weird smell coming from the drainage ditch near Lot 19. No one mentioned fines. No one warned anyone about bylaws. It felt like a neighborhood again. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, I walked outside, leaned against the railing, and looked toward the clubhouse. Its lights were on, just barely visible through the branches. It no longer felt like a monument to control. It felt like a building, a community space, something we could all use. And somewhere out there, Rowena was probably pacing a rented apartment, trying to figure out how everything had slipped through her fingers. She shouldn't have messed with the wrong barn. The first sign of real fallout came when a county assessor arrived on our street early one morning, parking his government sedan right in front of the now infamous clubhouse. He walked the perimeter with a camera and clipboard, snapping photos of everything: utility meters, foundation lines, even the placement of the new HVAC unit that had mysteriously appeared on the south wall weeks before Rowena vanished. When he reached my driveway, he gave me a nod and kept walking, scribbling notes furiously. By noon, the clubhouse was roped off with yellow caution tape. I hadn't expected that. Later that day, Teresa called and asked if I'd stop by her place. I hadn't been inside her home before. She lived on the far side of the subdivision and had only recently stepped into community leadership. Her husband, a retired electrician, sat at the kitchen island reading a newspaper while Teresa leaned over a stack of manila folders. "I thought you should see this before the next meeting," she said, handing me a sheet with a county letterhead. "What am I looking at?" "Hazardous materials report," she said, pushing her glasses up. "That HVAC unit. It was installed without permits, but more than that, it's venting into a sealed space. Carbon monoxide levels are through the roof." I read the numbers, my stomach tightening. "Was it used during any events?" "Only twice. A couple of board meetings and a private party Rowena hosted for that so-called consultant they paid." I set the paper down. This wasn't just negligence. We're starting to believe it was deliberate. The firm Rowena funneled money to, turns out it's tied to her cousin. He owns a contracting company that went bankrupt last year after being sued for unsafe demolition practices. Her husband looked up from the paper. Got fined for gutting a place without securing asbestos first. Wouldn't put anything past him. "Why didn't the county catch any of this during inspections?" I asked. "They weren't filed. The HOA bypassed everything. They used internal invoices and declared the work as volunteer-based maintenance. It sidestepped the need for proper inspections." I leaned back in the chair. "That clubhouse could have killed someone." Teresa nodded. "That's why the tape went up. The county's launching a criminal investigation. Not just financial this time, public endangerment." A week later, subpoenas landed on 3 more former board members. The sheriff's office escorted one of them, a woman named Judith Trammell, out of her home during dinner. The neighborhood went silent watching her get into the cruiser. By the next morning, someone had removed her nameplate from her mailbox. I didn't celebrate, not openly. But when I returned to the barn that night, I sat in the loft with the windows open, letting the spring breeze roll through. The place had taken shape faster than I expected. Rafters stained, tools hung, the floor polished and sealed. It wasn't just a barn anymore. It was something sturdier, a symbol of what we weren't going to tolerate again. At the next HOA meeting, held in the elementary school gymnasium since the clubhouse remained off limits, the turnout was the largest I'd seen. Folding chairs filled the floor, and people stood along the walls, arms crossed, waiting. Teresa took her place at the front, flanked by Anthony, and 2 newly appointed board members, one a local accountant, the other a nurse who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years. "Let's get to the point," Teresa said, bypassing the usual greetings. "We have a crisis on our hands." What the previous board did goes beyond mismanagement. It was criminal. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Why didn't anyone stop them?" Anthony stepped forward. "They built a system that discouraged scrutiny. They manipulated the bylaws, buried the financials, and punished anyone who pushed back." A man in the 3rd row stood up. "They fined me for putting in a wooden fence, said it violated the visual harmony rule." Turns out they used those fines to pay for that HVAC unit. A ripple of anger spread through the crowd. Teresa raised a hand. "The county has frozen the HOA's main account. A temporary oversight committee has been formed, and we're working with the sheriff's office and the DA to ensure everything is accounted for." Someone else asked, "What happens next?" "We hold a formal vote to restructure the HOA charter," Teresa said. "We're rewriting the bylaws to prevent unilateral decisions. Financial decisions over a certain threshold will require a full community vote." "And the clubhouse?" Another voice asked from the back. Anthony answered, "Condemned until repairs pass inspection. We're applying for grants to bring it up to code, but it'll be a while. In the meantime, we'll use public spaces or volunteer homes." I stood up. "You can use my barn." Heads turned. "It's got power, ventilation, seating. We can hold meetings there while things stabilize." Teresa smiled. "That's generous." "Everyone okay with that?" The applause was louder than expected. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached me to help with minor repairs. One had experience in drywall. Another owned a tool rental company and offered to loan equipment. By the end of the week, we'd set up temporary lighting, a bulletin board, and even a coffee station in the barn. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional. A month later, the trial against Rowena began. I wasn't called to testify. My documentation had already been submitted, but I attended the proceedings out of respect for what had been done to our community. The courtroom was packed. Rowena sat at the defendant's table in a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back. expression unreadable. Her cousin, the failed contractor, sat 2 rows behind, flanked by his attorney. The prosecution laid out the case: embezzlement, forgery, endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud a homeowner association of over $90,000. But it was the HVAC evidence that stuck. The city inspector testified that the improperly installed unit had the potential to cause serious harm, especially in an enclosed space used by the elderly. The jury didn't deliberate long, guilty. On all counts, Rowena was sentenced to 5 years with eligibility for parole in 2. Her cousin got 3 for his role in the contracting scam. The others took plea deals, probation, fines, and permanent bans from serving on any housing board in the state. Back home, the neighborhood had changed. The signs were subtle. Neighbors waved more often. Kids played in front yards without being warned about violating noise expectations. And the new board published every expense online, updated weekly. One afternoon, Vince stopped by the barn carrying a bucket of paint and a grin that didn't need explaining. "Thought we'd repaint the clubhouse once the county clears it," he said, "but figured we could test the color here first." I looked at the label. "Harvest Birch," he shrugged. "Sounds like an overpriced candle, but it's better than HOA beige." We painted the north wall together while the sun dipped low behind the trees. It was quiet, except for the sounds of brushes against wood and the occasional bird chatter. "You think this place will hold up?" he asked. "The barn? No, the neighborhood." I looked out at the homes, the slow-moving cars, the kids on scooters. It will now. By summer, the clubhouse reopened, fully permitted, ventilated, and with a plaque on the front wall listing its reconstruction contributors. My name was somewhere near the bottom, which suited me fine. The barn remained a community fixture. We held workshops, movie nights, even a chili cook-off once. People brought chairs, lanterns, and stories. No one mentioned bylaws. No one needed to. The board continued rotating every year. No one stayed too long. That was the new rule. Keep power moving, keep eyes open, and never let anyone build a throne out of a clipboard again. When I finally stepped back from helping with board oversight, Teresa handed me a small box. Inside was a miniature barn, carved from oak with a brass plate on the base, for reminding us who this place belongs to. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and returned home, where the barn stood tall against the fading light. This time, no one would block it.